what I want to speak to you guys about is the hip flexors and the important role of the hip flexors. Why do I choose these subjects is because it's probably something that I've spoken about a lot with ladies throughout the week, talking about pains, talking about imbalances, and it's something that I want everybody to know about. So when we talk about lower back pain, it could be due to tight hip flexors and often related to muscular imbalances throughout that region. And as we know, mobility, let me put that down because I'll play with that. Mobility comes from being mobile throughout the hip joint. Hip flexors are not the hip joint, remember that. The hip flexors are actually a group of 5 muscles that connect the femur. Now, the femur is the big thigh bone coming up to your hip joint, to the pelvis, and they play a big role when we walk. Now, we all walk. We walk to the car, we walk to the toilet, we walk to the kitchen. So usually we only become aware of hip flexors when they become tight. And you'll know when they become tight because you actually will have mobility issues then and pain coming from the imbalances. So remember that a tight muscle will happen from a muscle being shortened. So think about the muscle that plays a big role in you walking and the function of your hip. It becomes shortened and now you can't walk properly because your strides have shortened. You try and lengthen those strides out and it's just going to tighten and contract even more. So it really plays a big part of the range of motion throughout your hips. So reduced mobility often leads to reduced use of that hip flexor. So it's shortened and now it's not being used, so it'll just keep getting shortened because it doesn't know how to lengthen again. And this puts a huge strain on that hip joint. And we know, if you've spoken to me already, that hip joint needs 100% rotation. So once this is compromised, once that hip joint is compromised, it now is compromising so much more when we walk. So our knees, our lumbar spine, they all have to overcompensate now from that hip flexor, from that one hip flexor being tightened. Everything in your midsection that allows you to move now is compensated. And we all know that that's when pain will actually really kick in. So what is the biggest part of the hip flexors shortening up? Well, overuse and dysfunction in that area, but a big part of it is sedentary lifestyles, sitting down. When you sit, that hip flexor is shortened. So you're sitting, and just remember the hip flexors here. Let's say this is your core and this is your legs. You're sitting, this is shortened, this is lengthened, this is shortened. Once it's shortened, it won't remember how to lengthen again. Driving in a car for long periods of time, it will shorten and it will pull on the pelvis. Remember, there's 5 muscles now pulling on the femur, and that's a big moving joint. So sitting for long periods of time, if you are sitting for long periods of time, you must come up with a maintenance plan. Let's say that you have an office job and your hip flexors are shortened all the time, and then you want to go for a run in the afternoon. Could you imagine the pressure that's on that whole midsection now? Your hip joint, your femur, your pelvis, the psoas, the glutes, the core, all that midsection now is being compromised. So I'm getting off subject. So when that hip flexor is tightened, it will pull on the pelvis. Now, that'll create that pelvic tilt, anterior pelvic tilt, which means that spine will be curved. You compress some of your vertebrae, and now that pull is real through your hip flexors. Now you've set it in, and it's not going to lengthen without you having to treat it or somebody treating it, because it doesn't have the muscle memory to do that. So with that anterior pelvic tilt, now your core doesn't work properly either. That's a whole new subject. So when we have weak hip flexors are not the same as tight hip flexors, all right? They both cause pain, but they both are due to 2 different things. Reach out to me if you want to know the difference between both. So we know that sitting for prolonged period of times, we know driving in the car, we know that once they're shortened due to hip mobility dysfunction, they are all seized up and they're not going to lengthen again. What are you going to do about it? That's the big question. So now you think, okay, yeah, I think that I've got tight hip flexors. So do you have a tightness or an ache in your lower back, especially when you're standing? So when you're standing and you think that you're actually in good posture, but you still got that ache in your back, There's that pelvic tilt that's causing compression through your spine and drawing through the hip flexors. Do you have poor posture and difficult standing, sitting to standing? You have neck tightness because you've got that pelvic tilt. You've tilted throughout your back. Your spine is now compressed, and now we get pain traveling all the way up to your shoulders. Or do you have pain in your glutes? Pelvic tilt causes your glutes to switch off. Now your glutes are sore. And when your glutes are sore and they switch off, it puts pressure on your back. One little tightness, little dysfunction in your body due to the hip flexor, which is a big one for posture, which is a big one once tightened, gives you so much muscular posture dysfunction that we need to look at. Right. Am I ticking boxes? Are you sitting there nodding your head? Are you interested? Are you thinking this is you and you don't know where to go? All right. If you do have stretches to do, go and do them. And if they feel great, then go and do them. But I have an amazing stretch for the hip flexor. I have an amazing stretch that's going to target the hip flexor and other areas around that midsection as well. And if it's something that you want, I'm going to get you to reach out to me. I'm interested to hear who's thinking they may have hip flexor issues now. That's not the back pain. That's not the glute pain. That's not the neck pain. It may be due to your hip flexors and what you need to do with it now. Make sure that you would do the right exercises for you. All right. Notice that I haven't given you any exercises because I don't know your situation. I don't know your issues. So until I do, I cannot give you particular exercises. I can give you a stretch to relieve. So we know a weak muscle needs to be strengthened. We know that a tight muscle is not working correctly, needs to be released, but also needs to be strengthened and connected to the other muscles around it. Anywho, that is just touching lightly on the surface of hip flexors. I could talk for hours, but will you be interested? Okay, I am actually pretty keen to put a training together on hip flexors. So let me know who would be interested in a little training. It may be about 15 minutes long that I do a little training and a little bit more info on hip flexors. I don't have it yet, but I will get it within the next week. If that's you, pop your little hand up in the comments below and I shall get it to you. Have I made you think now about your body and where your pain's coming from this sneaky little hip flexor? All right, everybody, have a great night. Thank you.